Adrian Cole slammed the car door shut and stepped into the storm. He wasn't supposed to be out here, but tonight wasn't ordinary. Maria thought no one was watching, but Adrian was right behind her, following every step she took. He had one goal: catch her red-handed. Money was missing, trust was broken, and he was done asking questions. But what he saw tonight wasn't theft. It was something else, something that shattered everything he thought he knew. Rain hit the windshield like scattered needles as Adrian Cole's car turned into the long, winding driveway of his mansion. It was almost midnight, but the lights inside still burned brightly. They always did. His mansion was more awake than he was. Inside, the staff moved quietly, cleaning, cooking, preparing for a man who barely noticed their existence. "Good evening, sir," Maria said as she opened the door for him, wiping her hands on her apron. She was in her mid-30s, with tired eyes that still managed a soft kindness. Adrian barely glanced at her. "Where's my dinner?" he asked, his voice low but sharp enough to slice the silence in half. "It's already prepared, sir," she replied. "Would you like it served in the dining room or—" "In my office," he interrupted, loosening his tie. "And next time, make sure the driveway lights are fixed. I almost drove into the hedge." "Yes, sir," she said, bowing her head slightly before disappearing down the hallway. Adrian walked into his massive office, walls lined with art, shelves full of books he'd never read. He pressed a button on his desk, and the curtains closed automatically, shutting out the storm. He liked control, the kind that silenced the world outside. But lately, something has been bothering him. The house expenses had quietly risen, even though his lifestyle hadn't changed. Food went missing, small cash sums unaccounted for. Nothing major, but enough to make him frown when he looked at the reports. He picked up his phone and called his assistant, Blake. "Blake, pull up last month's inventory. The house expenses are climbing again." Blake's voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes, sir. I noticed that too. I think someone's—" "Stealing?" Adrian said flatly. Blake hesitated. "It's possible. The maid, Maria, she's often the last one to leave. You might want to keep an eye on her." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Maria. She's been here 2 years, never had a complaint." "Still," Blake said carefully, "sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you least expect." Adrian ended the call and sat there, staring at the storm outside. Trust. That word had always felt foreign to him. People took advantage of kindness. That's what his father used to say. Maybe he'd been foolish to think he could run a home without the same scrutiny he ran his companies with. When Maria came in with his dinner, soup and grilled chicken, she placed it gently on the desk. "Will there be anything else, sir?" He didn't look up. "No, that's all." She turned to leave, but something in his voice made her pause. "Maria," he said suddenly, "where do you go after work?" She blinked, startled. "Home, sir, usually." "Usually," he repeated. "And the other times?" Her hands fidgeted. "Sometimes I visit my sister's place. She's unwell." He watched her carefully. Her tone was steady, but her eyes gave away something else. Hesitation, fear, guilt maybe. He said nothing more, and she slipped out quietly. When she was gone, Adrian replayed the conversation in his mind. He didn't believe her. He didn't like not knowing. The next evening, as the staff began to leave, he waited by the window. Maria signed out and walked toward the bus stop just outside the gate. Adrian grabbed his keys. "Not tonight," he muttered to himself, and followed. He kept a distance, driving slowly through the wet streets. She didn't notice him. Her bus stopped near an old part of the city, a place that looked nothing like the glass towers he was used to. She walked down a narrow alley, clutching a bag to her chest. Adrian parked a few blocks away and followed on foot. Rain soaked his coat, but curiosity burned stronger than the cold. He saw her enter a dimly lit building with peeling paint and broken windows. He crept closer, peering through a crack. Inside, he saw something that made his breath catch. Children, at least 10 of them. Some sleeping on the floor, others sitting on worn blankets. Maria unpacked her bag, bread, fruits, small medicine bottles, and began handing them out. A small boy coughed weakly, and she pressed a cloth to his forehead, humming softly. "Eat slowly," she whispered to the others. "There's enough for everyone tonight." Adrian froze. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stood there, rain dripping from his hair, watching as she cut the bread into even pieces and smiled at the smallest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6. The girl tugged at her sleeve. "Aunt Maria, will you stay tonight?" "Not tonight, sweetie," Maria said gently. "But I'll come again tomorrow, I promise." The child nodded sleepily and leaned against her shoulder. Maria held her close, humming until she drifted off. Adrian turned away, heart pounding. He had followed her expecting betrayal. Instead, he'd found something entirely different, something he didn't understand yet. Back in his car, he sat in silence. The sound of rain was deafening now. He tried to make sense of what he saw. Why would she do that? Why would a woman earning so little give away so much? He gripped the steering wheel tightly. "What the hell are you doing, Maria?" he whispered. The next morning, he watched her again. She came to work on time, smiling faintly as she arranged flowers in the hallway. No sign of guilt, no trace of fatigue. It was as if last night never happened. He called Blake. "Forget what you said about Maria stealing." Blake sounded confused. "Sir, just forget it," Adrian said shortly. Then, after a pause, "And double her pay, effective immediately." Blake stammered. "Double her—" "Yes, sir." Adrian hung up and stood at the window, watching Maria polish the staircase banister. She hummed softly, the same tune he'd heard her sing to the children. His chest felt tight again. That evening, he followed her once more, not out of suspicion this time, but curiosity, almost guilt. He wanted to understand. The same bus, the same dark street. But tonight, when she entered the building, he stepped closer. The floorboards creaked under his shoes as he pushed the door open quietly. Maria looked up in shock. The bread she was slicing slipped from her hand. "Sir, Mr. Cole, what are you—" Adrian raised a hand. "Don't stop. I didn't come to fire you." He looked around, the cracked walls, the cold air, the children huddled under thin blankets. "I came to see what this is." Maria swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like. It looks like you're feeding a dozen kids with food from my kitchen," he said softly. "But I don't think you're stealing." Her eyes filled with tears. "No, sir, never. They're orphans. Their home burned down 3 years ago. I was a volunteer there before I worked for you. My husband, he died in that fire. He saved 5 of them before—" Her voice broke. "Before he couldn't save himself." Adrian's expression softened. "And you've been taking care of them ever since." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "I can't leave them. They have no one else. I use what I can. I didn't mean any harm." Adrian looked around again, at the little faces, the shivering hands, the way they clung to her like she was the only safety they knew. For the first time in years, something cracked inside him, something he thought was gone. He took a deep breath. "You should have told me." Maria shook her head. "People like you don't understand people like me, sir." He said nothing, just stood there, rainwater dripping from his coat onto the dusty floor. "Come on," he finally said quietly. "Get your things. We're leaving." "Leaving?" she asked, confused. "You and these kids, you're not staying in this place another night." She blinked. "Sir, I can't—" "You can," he said firmly, "and you will." Maria stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to believe him. The children looked up, wide-eyed and silent, their small faces caught between fear and hope. Adrian took a step forward, his voice calm but resolute. "You can't stay here another night. It's unsafe, and I won't pretend I didn't see this." He said, "Get their coats, whatever they have. I'll call for a car." Maria's lips trembled. "Sir, please. They'll be frightened. They don't know you." Adrian crouched down, meeting the eyes of the little girl he'd seen earlier. She clutched a torn stuffed bear, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you going to take us away?" He softened, his tone gentler than Maria had ever heard. "No, sweetheart. I'm taking you somewhere warm. You'll be safe there, all of you." Maria's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, gathering the children with practiced care. Within minutes, a quiet procession made its way out of the crumbling building, small feet splashing through puddles, shivering under the rain. Adrian's driver, stunned but silent, opened the car doors. The children piled in cautiously, their eyes darting around the luxury interior like it was another world. Maria sat last, dripping wet. clutching her bag tightly. As the car drove off, the city lights reflected in the windows like distant stars. The children huddled together, whispering softly. Adrian sat across from them, watching in silence. He wasn't sure what he felt. Guilt, maybe, or something heavier. Maria's voice broke the quiet. "You didn't have to do this, sir." "I know," he replied, eyes fixed on the passing streets. "That's why I did." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't seem like the cold, untouchable man she worked for. He looked tired. Humans. When they arrived at the mansion, the staff stared in disbelief. Adrian's sharp tone cut through their murmurs. "Prepare the guest wing, all of it." "Sir, for whom?" one of the maids began. "For them," he said simply, gesturing to Maria and the children. "And no questions." The staff scattered. Maria tried to protest again, but he silenced her with a look that was more weary than stern. "You said your husband saved 5 of them. You've saved the rest. Let me help now." Within an hour, the children were bathed, fed, and tucked into freshly made beds. Beds softer than anything they'd ever known. Some fell asleep instantly. Others stared in awe at the chandeliers above. Maria lingered in the hallway, watching them, her eyes glistening. When Adrian approached, she turned quickly to wipe her tears. "They're not used to this," she said softly. "They'll think it's a dream." "Then let's not wake them," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You don't understand what this means." "I'm beginning to," he said, his voice low. For a long moment they stood there, listening to the rain outside and the soft breathing of sleeping children. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that neither had expected. Over the next few days, the mansion changed. The once silent halls echoed with laughter and running feet. Toys appeared where there had been none. The staff adjusted, awkwardly at first, then with growing warmth. Even Adrian's assistant, Blake, was caught off guard when he visited. "Sir, forgive me, but your house sounds like a daycare now," Blake said over the phone. Adrian chuckled, a sound no one had heard in years. Maybe it's about time it did. He spent more time at home than he ever had. He found himself pausing during meetings, distracted by thoughts of Maria teaching the kids how to fold napkins in the kitchen, or the smallest one, Emma drawing chalk flowers on the marble floor. One evening, as he passed by the living room, he saw them all sitting in a circle, Maria reading aloud, her voice soft and melodic. The children were transfixed. Emma noticed him and waved. "Mr. Cole, come sit," she chirped. He hesitated. "I don't think I'd fit in your circle," he said lightly. Maria smiled. "There's always space if you want there to be." He sat down, awkward at first, but the children giggled and made room. Maria continued reading, her voice weaving emotion through every line. Adrian watched the way her expression softened at every page, the way the children leaned against her with absolute trust. Something inside him ached, a realization that in all his wealth and success, he had never known a moment that felt this real. Later that night, as he poured himself a glass of whiskey in his office, Maria appeared at the door. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said quietly, "for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "They needed a place. I had one." She shook her head. "It's not just that. You could have turned away. Most people would have." He studied her for a long moment. "Maybe I used to be one of those people." Silence lingered, thick but gentle. Then he asked, almost casually, "How much longer were you planning to do this alone?" She smiled sadly. "As long as I could, until I couldn't anymore." He looked down, the ice in his glass clinking softly. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "My mother. She used to help people like that. My father called it weakness. I called it strength." Maria's eyes softened. "Maybe she'd be proud of you tonight." He looked up, meeting her gaze. And for the first time, he didn't look away. Days turned into weeks. The children grew comfortable. The house grew alive. Maria smiled more, though she still carried quiet grief in her eyes. But change never comes without pain. One morning, Adrian's lawyer called him in alarm. "Cole Industries is under review. They're saying your funds have been redirected to charity, orphan housing. That's not in the annual report." Adrian frowned. "It's my money." "Yes, but investors think you've lost focus. The board's nervous. They're talking about a leadership vote. He hung up, irritation mixing with disbelief. That evening, when Maria came to check on him, she found him pacing the study, anger simmering in his tone. They think kindness is weakness, he muttered. They think helping others makes me unstable. Maria stood by the door, her voice steady. Maybe that's their problem, not yours. He looked at her, really looked, and something in him broke through the storm of frustration. You're right, he said quietly. For once, I don't care what they think. Her lips curved slightly. That's a good start. He laughed softly, a tired, genuine laugh. But as she turned to leave, he said, Maria, she paused. If you ever feel like you're carrying too much alone again, you can come to me. Her voice wavered. That means more than you know. Outside, the night settled quiet and still. The mansion, once cold and empty, now glowed with warmth, the kind that can't be bought, only felt. The following week brought more storms, both inside and out. Adrian's mansion, once a haven of laughter, grew quiet again as he faced endless calls and board meetings. Rumors spread fast, headlines calling him the billionaire turned charity case, investors pulling out, stock prices trembling. He sat in his study one evening, the rain returning like a cruel reminder. Maria entered quietly with tea, setting it down beside him. You didn't eat again, she said softly. He didn't look up. I'm not hungry. You've been saying that for 3 days. He rubbed his temple. You wouldn't understand, Maria. I'm losing everything I've built. She hesitated, then spoke gently. Maybe what you're building now is worth more. He let out a dry laugh. Worth more? Tell that to the board threatening to replace me tomorrow. She moved closer. Adrian, when my husband died, I thought I'd lost everything too. The house, the life, the plans we made, all gone. But then I realized something. The things that last aren't made of walls or money. They're made of what we do for others. That's what survives. He looked at her, eyes tired but searching. And what if I'm not strong enough to keep both? My world and theirs? Then maybe one of them isn't meant for you anymore, she said simply. He fell silent. The words hung in the air like a weight pressing on his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. He wandered the halls aimlessly until he found himself outside the children's rooms. The door to Emma's room was slightly open. He peeked in. She was asleep, her tiny hand clutching the stuffed bear. Something in that small, peaceful sight tore through him. He realized what Maria meant. The life he had built before was empty. But this was real. The next morning, he walked into the boardroom dressed sharply, the same way he always did. But this time, there was a calmness behind his eyes. Cole, one of the older directors, said, Your decisions lately have raised concern, diverting funds to orphan housing, neglecting projects. This isn't you. Adrian looked at him steadily. You're right, it isn't the old me. A murmur rippled across the table. The old me only cared about numbers. This version of me remembers what those numbers mean. I'm not apologizing for helping people who've been invisible all their lives. One of the younger board members frowned. You're risking billions. And saving lives, Adrian said quietly. You decide which one matters more. They argued, shouted, demanded, but he didn't bend. By the end of the meeting, 2 members resigned, and half the investors threatened to withdraw. Adrian left the building with his head high, but his heart heavy. When he returned home, Maria met him at the door, worry in her eyes. How did it go? He gave a small, tired smile. Let's just say I'm officially not the most popular man in the company anymore. Her face fell. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. For once I said what I meant. That evening, the children gathered around him in the living room. Emma climbed onto his lap, looking up at him. Mr. Cole, are you sad? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. A little. She nodded seriously. When I'm sad, Aunt Maria tells me to talk about it. Do you want to talk about it? He chuckled. Maybe later, sweetheart. Maria watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling. The man she had once feared now looked like someone entirely new, someone she couldn't help but care about. As the days passed, Adrian began to change even more. He spent less time in meetings and more time in the city, visiting shelters, talking to the children Maria once cared for in secret. News outlets caught on. Billionaire turns mansion into home for orphans. And for every critic that mocked him, 1,000 strangers applauded him. But success in the heart often invites pain in the world. One night, Maria received a call from one of the older boys who still lived in the ruined part of the city. Their building, the one where she used to bring food, had been condemned. The remaining children had nowhere to go. She rushed to Adrian's study, breathless. "Sir, Adrian, they're shutting it down. Those kids, they'll be out on the street." He stood immediately. "How many?" "Maybe 20, maybe more." He grabbed his coat. "Get in the car." An hour later, they were standing before the crumbling structure, city workers already chaining the doors. Children huddled nearby, frightened. Adrian stepped forward. "This building is condemned, not these children. I'll take responsibility for them." The city officer looked confused. "Sir, this is city property." "Then consider it purchased," Adrian said, his tone firm. "Whatever it costs." The man hesitated, then nodded. Within hours, Adrian arranged shelter, food, and transportation for the displaced kids. Maria worked beside him through the night, organizing clothes, soothing the frightened ones. At dawn, as the last child was safely asleep in the mansion's guest wing, Adrian sank into a chair, exhausted. Maria sat beside him, her face pale but peaceful. "You can't keep doing this alone," she whispered. He looked at her. "Then don't let me do it alone." Their eyes met, a quiet understanding forming between them, something fragile but undeniable. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city waking up. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because the night I followed you, I thought I was going to expose a thief, but instead I found what I'd been missing my whole life." Her eyes welled with tears. "You've already done more than enough." He shook his head slowly. "Not for them, and not for you." The morning sun began to rise, golden light streaming through the windows, the first dawn that felt like hope. For the first time since the fire that took her husband, Maria smiled without pain. And for the first time since his father's death, Adrian felt something he never thought he would again: peace. But as he looked at the sleeping children, a new thought crept into his mind. "If I can change this house," he said quietly, "why not change the world beyond it?" Maria turned to him. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the horizon, eyes shining with quiet resolve. "A foundation. Not just money, real change, schools, homes, safety. I have the resources. Maybe it's time I finally use them right." Her hand trembled slightly. "That's incredible." He smiled softly. "It's the least I can do." Maria's heart fluttered, pride and admiration mixing with something deeper, something she was afraid to name. Outside, the mansion stood like a beacon against the gray morning sky. Inside, for the first time, it truly felt like a home. The following months unfolded like a quiet miracle. Adrian Cole's mansion, once a fortress of solitude, became the heart of a movement. News crews gathered at the gates, but for the first time, their cameras captured something more than a billionaire's wealth. They captured warmth. The Cole Foundation for Lost Futures opened its first home for orphans in the city, fully funded and personally overseen by Adrian himself. Maria stood beside him at the ribbon cutting, surrounded by children, including those she had once fed in secret. She looked nervous under the flashing lights, but when Adrian glanced at her and smiled, she relaxed. He leaned toward her. "You were right. This," he gestured at the children playing in the courtyard, "is what lasts." She smiled. "I never thought I'd live to see this day." He looked at her gently. "You made it happen, Maria." After the ceremony, when the reporters were gone, they walked through the quiet halls of the new home. Children's laughter echoed from the rooms, filling the air with life. Adrian paused by a window, watching them play. "Do you ever think your husband would approve?" he asked softly. Maria smiled faintly. "He'd probably tell me I took too long to find help." Adrian's lips curved. "Then I'm glad you let me catch up." Their laughter faded into silence, not awkward, but full of everything they didn't need to say. Over time, their bond deepened in unspoken ways. She'd find him sometimes sitting quietly in the children's room, helping with homework or fixing a broken toy. He'd find her in the kitchen, humming the same tune she once sang in that crumbling building. But beneath the joy, both carried a lingering fear that this peace was too fragile to last. One evening, as autumn leaves danced outside the window, Adrian received a call. It was from the hospital. "Mr. Cole," the voice said urgently. "It's about one of the children, Emma. She's been brought in with severe fever and respiratory distress." The phone nearly slipped from his hand. Within minutes, he and Maria were in the car, speeding through the night. At the hospital, the sterile lights felt cruel. Maria clutched her scarf, trembling as they watched doctors rush in and out of Emma's room. "She's been sick before," Maria whispered, tears welling. Her lungs were weak from the fire smoke. "I thought she'd grown stronger." Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and steady. "She will. She has to." Hours passed. Finally, the doctor emerged. His face was grave. "She's stable for now, but the next 48 hours are critical. Her body's fighting hard." Maria broke down, covering her face with her hands. Adrian guided her to a chair, sitting beside her. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "When my mother was in the hospital, I never stayed. I was too afraid to see her fade, but I'm not leaving this time, not for anything." Maria looked at him, eyes swollen with tears. "You've changed so much." He smiled weakly. "You showed me how." They stayed through the night, Maria holding Emma's hand, Adrian sitting close by. He watched Maria hum softly, the same lullaby that once echoed in that ruined building. And as the hours dragged on, the memory of that first night, the night he followed her, flooded his mind. Back then, he thought compassion was weakness. Now, it was the only strength he had left. By dawn, Emma's breathing steadied, the fever broke. Maria leaned back, tears streaming down her cheeks as relief washed over her. "She's going to be okay," Adrian said, his voice cracking slightly. "You did it, Maria." She shook her head, smiling through tears. "We did." When Emma finally woke, her tiny voice was hoarse but playful. "Mr. Cole, you look tired." He chuckled, brushing her hair gently. "You gave us quite a scare, young lady." "Are we still going home?" she murmured. He glanced at Maria, then back at the little girl. "We never left home, sweetheart. We just brought it here." A few weeks later, Emma returned stronger than ever, greeted by the cheers of the other children. Adrian threw a small celebration in the mansion. Music, laughter, even cake. Maria stood in the corner, watching with misty eyes. Adrian joined her quietly. "You know," he said softly, "when I first followed you, I thought I was going to uncover a lie." Maria smiled sadly. "And instead, you found a truth you weren't ready for." He nodded slowly. "You showed me what love without return looks like, what humanity is." She looked at him, voice trembling. "You didn't just help the children, Adrian. You helped me heal." He held her gaze for a long moment, something tender passing between them. Outside, fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. Inside, warmth radiated. Laughter, chatter, the hum of life reborn. Months turned into a year. The Cole Foundation expanded to 3 more homes across the city. Adrian sold off one of his companies to fund the cause fully. The world now called him the billionaire with a heart. But to Maria and the children, he was simply Mr. Cole, the man who kept his promises. One quiet night, as the children slept, Adrian stood by the balcony, staring at the stars. Maria stepped beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "It's strange," he murmured. "I used to look at this city and see competition. Now I see stories, people, faces." She smiled softly. "That's because you stopped looking down from your tower." He laughed quietly. "You really don't hold back, do you?" "Never did," she said, her eyes gleaming. He turned to her, serious now. "You could have left after I found you that night. Most people would have run." "I almost did," she admitted. "But then I saw something in your eyes, a man who wasn't as cold as he wanted to be." He took a breath. "You changed me, Maria. I don't even know how to repay that." She shook her head gently. "Don't. Just keep doing what you're doing. That's enough." A long silence followed, the kind that only exists between people who've walked through pain together and come out whole. He looked at her one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. I followed you once out of suspicion, but if I hadn't, I might never have found my purpose. Tears shimmered in Maria's eyes. And if you hadn't, I might never have found hope again. They stood there under the night sky, the wind carrying the faint laughter of sleeping children through the open windows. Two souls who had been broken in different ways, now whole because they found each other in the ruins. The mansion lights glowed warmly behind them, no longer symbols of power, but of compassion, of second chances, of love that healed. And as the city slowly drifted into sleep, Adrian whispered the words that had waited all this time to be said. "Thank you, Maria, for saving me." She smiled, tears spilling freely now. "No, Adrian, you saved yourself." The camera would linger there if this were a story on screen. Two figures standing in quiet understanding beneath a sky full of light. Because sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with grand gestures, but with the courage to follow and to see what the heart had been blind to all along. And for those listening, those watching, maybe they'd feel it too, that spark of change, that reminder that kindness still exists, even in the most unlikely hearts. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories that remind us what really matters. Share this in the comments. What would you do if you discovered something like this? And remember, true wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in what you give away. See you in the next story.